Hey, how's it going? So, with the release of Silent Hill F less than a month away, I figure our next kit is going to be this 1/8 scale Pyramid Head and Bubblehead Nurse Kit by Tanuki Figures from Silent Hill 2. Let's get started. Now, first and foremost, we're going to take a look at the parts, starting with Pyramid Head's head. I really like that it's got all the chunky flesh detail underneath. You won't really see any of it, but the fact that they put that in there is nice. It's really nicely designed. It's got all the little cracks and grooves and everything in there that it should. Most of these parts aren't really going to require much in the way of sanding, if any. This piece won't. I'm very happy about that. However, the torso, the back of it, you can see some of these spots where it's going to need to be sanded off where the supports were, and it will lose a tiny bit of detail, but it shouldn't be too bad. But the detail and the musculature and everything looks incredible. I love it. Very sinewy. Very cool looking, and the front of the torso doesn't need any sanding, so that's going to be nice and easy to deal with. This is the upper half of the I don't even know what you'd call it, but I know it's made of human skin. So very nice details in there. Looks very skin-like, very sinewy, you know. Very nicely done. This won't require much, if any, sanding, so that's nice. And then here's the bottom half of it. But yeah, still, I like the way they design these. So each part will have a square that's got an edge cut off, and then each piece that has a hole in it has a corresponding shape, so you don't accidentally put it in the wrong way. You know, so like if you put the arm in backwards or something, there's no risk of you putting the arm in backwards, you know, at the wrong angle or whatever. It's not something that's likely to happen, but it can, you know. So there's that. Next, we'll look at the nurse. I do like that the skin parts are molded separately to make it easier to paint the skin and the clothes. So here's the face of it. I absolutely love it. It looks so good, so gnarly. Now, some of the parts, like a little bit here, you can see it's going to need a little bit of sanding or filling. Also has the little nurse hat. And same as before, you got an exact shape for how to put it on, so you don't do it, you know, the wrong way accidentally. Pretty simple design, but nicely done. When you attach the top to the bust, you can see here there's no seam line at all. It's perfect. This side, there's a little bit of one, but I found if I put it in like just right, I can remove that. So it won't be an issue, and I won't have to worry about filling that later. It shouldn't be needed. But on the back of the blouse, you could see how it's going to need some sanding. Like, seriously, and unfortunately, that's going to remove some of the striping on the fabric. But, I mean, it's got to be done, so. And then we have the, if I can pull this out now, lower torso with the same issue on the back, but not nearly as bad. You could see it's almost non-existent. And since the back of this top isn't going to be showing, it's not too much of an issue. This will be showing, though, so we want it nice and clean. You can see here it's going to have some little rough bits we have to sand down. And then, you know, you've got the buttons of the skirt and everything really nicely done, really beautifully detailed. And then, of course, we have the legs. There is going to be, you could see on the back here, there's going to be a lot of sanding needed. Luckily, most of the supports are on pieces on the back, pieces that are going to be easier to deal with, you know. So that's nice. And of course, we have a pipe for her. And the arms, you are going to need to sand down the fingers a little bit. This one's not too bad, but I love all that detail of the wrinkles in the gloves. I really want to try to get an opaque look for those, since they're just latex gloves, you know. Same with this hand. You could see here it's going to need even more sanding. You can see the spot here, over here on the middle finger. But again, nothing too crazy. And now we have the parts of the sword, the great knife. Right, so they'll connect in like so. Of course, this may need some putty to fill the gap, because there will be a teeny tiny little seam there. See, we could probably remove most of it once we glue it together, but odds are we're gonna have to put a little bit of putty on there, and that's okay. And you can see on the arms too, his arms have such great detail, the veins, everything. Luckily the arms don't have too much to sand. The great knife does. You can kind of see these rough spots here and there, over here, you know, but again, beautiful detail. Trying to watch the language. And then same with this here. Really nicely done. And then of course the shoe and the ankle. But yeah, gorgeous kit. And now we have the base, which is something a little special. I'm going to show you this. This is actually kind of cool. So there's a front and back half to the base, right? You got the two parts here. Well, check the bottom. One half has the web address and a QR code molded into the plastic. I thought that was genius, man. And then, of course, the other half, Tanuki figures. I thought that was really cool. It's going to be hidden, but it's cool to know it's there. Anyway, that's the part, so I'm going to start sanding, and we're going to get this ready so we can finally paint it.
All right, first things first. Take a small bucket or some Tupperware, fill it with a few drops of dish soap and lukewarm tap water. Soak your parts for about 5 minutes and then scrub them clean with an unused toothbrush before rinsing them in an empty sink. Then take a paper towel and let them air dry for about 24 hours. Make sure the toothbrush you use and the bucket or Tupperware are something that you'll never put in your mouth or have food in it, because this stuff can be hazardous to your health. And then every time we sand it, we just make sure that we dust it off instead of washing.
All right, so now we're going to focus on getting everything sanded. I've already started on the lower half of Pyramid Head. The bottom I'm not worried about because it's not really going to be an issue. Same here, I got this started. I'm using my usual sanding sticks, so coarse, fine, and extra fine here. So working our way through. But yeah, just trying to go light. We don't want to remove too much of that detail, so we want to go as light as possible, okay? It's gonna remove some, there's no way around that, but we will start with our coarse and work our way up to the extra fine. Just being very, very careful not to push too hard. We don't want to remove too much because it's just such a beautiful kit. I wouldn't suggest doing what I'm doing. I would strongly suggest using a mask for this because these the dust can be harmful. I'm just so used to not wearing one, but do as I say, not as I do. All right, so before we get to priming, we have some gap filling to do. The great knife is going to be really easy to clean up, and since it's such a small gap, it'll fill it in perfectly. This stuff, this Vallejo plastic putty, it's water soluble, so it will, it's removable with water. You can see I've done the other side already, cleaned it up. That gap will be gone once we get to it. I am going to put a little extra in there just because there's a couple holes. Now we're going to kind of spread it across like so. And since it's water soluble, it's removable with water. So we're going to take a brush. I'm using this flat brush here just because it'll be easier to get into any straight areas. Get it wet in my water, dip the water off a little bit on a paper towel, and then we can start to clean it up. So for example, right here, right, we have a little extra. We don't want that. So we're going to try to remove it. You see how that large clump is now gone? We want to be careful though, because just like this can remove the excess, it can also remove the putty we put in the gaps. And we want it to stay where we want it. So it's got a good amount of work time. So you have time to mess with it if you need to. And I hear it's sandable. I've never tried it myself, but I do know while it's wet, it's easy to work with before it dries, and then it'll harden. If we need to, we can look into sanding it, but we shouldn't need to at all. Now, I've done something similar with the base because there were some gaps. Now, there's no getting around the fact that we're not going to have the grading in these gaps, you know, but I came up with a solution. We're going to turn it into custom work. We're going to turn it into the other world from Silent Hill and use some texture effects to hide that.
Now, if you can't remove all the seams from the great knife, that's okay, because remember, we're going to be doing weathering and rust effects afterwards.
All right, so we're going to let the base and the great knife dry overnight. But in the meantime, I primed everything else. So anything that's metal, or in this case, the human skin on the clothing, those are going to be Chaos Black. Everything else is White Scar. One thing I did want to point out, though, now that we have that primer on there, look at that insane level of detail we missed before. There's like lower layers of flesh on there. Just, oh man, it's just such a gorgeous looking kit. That's just amazing to me. And yeah, we did remove some of the detail there by having to sand, but it's not too bad. You got the cuts in the skin, Man, it's such a gorgeous kit. And same with these parts, the arms. Same deal. There's a lot going on. Now you see a couple of divots in there. Those shouldn't be too bad. We have a solution for that. But also before we get there, I want to show you how we're going to do it on the nurse. Now on the skirt, you could see it's all but gone. There's one or two, but also keep in mind there's all these tears in the skirt. So some of those could pass as parts of the tears. However, some of them should be easily removable with just by adding paint. But in some cases like these where they're deeper, what we're going to do is we're going to take that same Vallejo plastic putty for the deeper ones. And where'd you go? Right there. And we're going to fill those in with this, right? So this is only going to work on the deeper ones, but let's try like here, for example, right here. Should fill those in nicely. And now you've got a nice flat surface that shouldn't be too much of an issue to get paint on. So that's how we're going to resolve that with the little ones. In some cases, when they stick out a lot, like they were on the legs, we will go back and sand again just to remove those. I'm going to give you another example here if I can find one. I want to say, what piece was it? I don't think any of them really had it all that bad. Ah, yes, this is what I was thinking of. So the shoe on this side here, I scraped off a little bit already, but you'll notice, you see those divots, how they protrude, and they stick out. They don't just go in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this is, I want to say, a fine sanding stick, and I'm going to go over that and sand that down. And thankfully, because we used white scar, it stands out more and it makes it easier to see. So it makes it easier to clean up, and it'll make it easier to notice it before you start doing all the paint and realize, well, crap, I got to redo all of it now. It's going to make your life so much easier. Again, use a mask for this. Do as I say, not as I do. And now they're completely flat, so it won't be an issue anymore. Like I said, there's a couple in his arms as well. Now that I'm looking for them, I'm having trouble with it. There's a couple there, but actually no, those look more like tears in the skin, honestly. Oh, back of the shoe. We see more of those, the spots where the supports were removed. So same thing, sand that down. And we're just going to have to be careful. You don't want to break the shoe off of the hand there. But after we do this, we'll just have to go back over with white scar again. Probably be a couple coats, but at least it's going to be worth it. Now, once all the primer has dried, there's one last step before we can start painting, and that is super gluing the arms to the torso and then filling in the seams with our Vallejo plastic putty. Then we'll let it dry for 24 hours. Now we're going to move on to painting, and keep in mind that all the colors that we use will be neatly organized in the description for easy access. Alright, so the first thing we're going to work on is the skin. So I'm going to do a damp dry brush of Rakarth flesh. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to get I'm using a flat brush, nice and wet, dabbing it off on a paper towel like you would for a dry brush, only with water. Take our Rakarth flesh, dab that in the water and wipe it off a bit, and start painting. So what we want, there we go. What we want is a nice even coat. This is actually a little too dry. There we go. And we're going to cover over the entire thing. This is going to be our base color. And you can see once you start putting it on, you won't have any brush strokes. And if you see very thin light ones, that's okay, because when they're that thin, they will not show in the final product. Now I tend to do the remaining layers immediately after. This keeps it from drying too soon. So also make sure you keep your brush damp. You don't want it drying up on you, because then the paint's going to start getting gunked up. So as you go, make sure you keep brushing it on. And so far, here's where we're at with the torso. It's coming across great. So I don't know if you noticed, but the seams for the arms were not nearly as well puttied as I would have liked. So I went back in, applied more putty, and blended it in with a damp brush around the edges. Now after I applied that putty, I did let it dry for several hours. Then I wound up sticking it in front of a fan for like 15 minutes. It covers it up enough that I'm happy with it. And I had to do it that way because, again, this stuff's water-based, so if you put a damp brush on it, it's going to dissolve. And so now that we have our solid color, the next thing we're going to do, bring this down a bit, we're going to take Lahmian medium, okay? We're going to shake that up really good. Ooh. And we're going to put a couple dollops of it on our wet palette. We're doing this before the wash color because we don't want to mix the Lahmian medium up with another color. So I put 3 dollops of it on with this large shade brush. Any brush this shape can work. You don't necessarily have to get this one. And we're also going to do 50% Seraphim Sepia. So, you know what? I'm actually going to do half. I'm going to do half. So, 3 dollops of the Lahmian medium, 2 dollops of the Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to blend that together. This is going to be our initial shade color. Now, what this is going to do, besides just going into the recesses, this is also going to bring out those details so we can see them better and paint them more easily. As you're applying the wash, be careful not to let it pool. Anytime you see some pooling, dab it up a bit with your brush, and as you go, keep an eye on it. Give it a few minutes before you put it down, and make sure nothing settles and pools too much. Once you're satisfied that nothing's going to pool up anymore, you can set it aside to dry. Okay, so now that that's dried and we've brought out all those really nice details, we're going to do another damp dry brush as our raised highlight color, only this time we're going to be using some finer brushes to get into those small areas, because we're going to leave everything in the shadows. We're going to leave all those grooves and deep spaces in that darker color. So first I'm going to start on the pecs. So I'm going to grab this brush here, and we're just going to do the same thing we did before with a damp dry brush, only this time we want to keep the point on our brushes. So we don't want to be treating it like a dry brush. We want to be treating it like a regular brush. Okay, so I'm going to take this raised color, this Flayed One Flesh, all right, and I'm going to start doing my damp dry brush over all those raised surfaces. Okay, so like here, for example, I'll say that's too much water, so let's get a little more of the paint on there, wipe that off a bit. Okay, we're going to start going over all those raised surfaces, get in all those details, and it's going to take a couple coats, but when we're done, it's going to look really good. So just continue with this across the entire model. Okay, now I'm going to give you an example of a side that's done and a side that's in the middle of being done. So here is the side that's in the middle of being done. If you look super close, you can see some very thin brush strokes. But if they're thin enough and you dampen your brush enough, they won't be seen on the finished product. Now, I'm not doing everything completely solid because we want layers, we want some depth. And so the entirety of the skin isn't going to be the exact same color. So in some cases, I'm adding less. I don't want it all completely solid. So you can see in the ribs, because on this side, the completed side, you can see that some of it, you can see the lower layer through to show different levels of highlights and shadow. I'm going to be continuing this on, and when I'm done, I'll show you the finished product of the skin for this layer, and then we'll move on to the next. Alright, now that our main skin color is done, we're going to take our Lahmian medium with this smaller brush here. Okay, I'm going to take 1 little dollop of that. Let's do 2. Okay, then we're going to take 1 little dollop of our Seraphim Sepia. Okay, mix it in a little bit there. We're going to have to clean off our brush real quick. Alright, now we're going to take Carriburg Crimson, shake that up a bit, and we're going to do 2 dollops of that. And then we're going to blend all that together, all 3 of those. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to put a shade in all of those little cuts. I'm going to see if I can get this to focus here. Just in the cuts. Okay, it's going to give us a nice gory kind of look to it. Okay, find any other ones on the skin. I got one right here, big one, right? Fill that in. I'm gonna add a little bit more than that. Okay. And since we have that original shade color in there, it adds a little bit of a fleshy look to the muscle as well on the inside there. This is a little too thick. There we go. And we'll just do this for all the cuts and gashes all over the skin. Okay. Once dry, I touched up all the areas around the gashes with our Flayed 1 Flesh skin color. And with that, the skin of Pyramid Head is complete. Moving on. Next, we're going to take Rhinox hide and paint the wraps on his waist. The cloth on the Great Knife looks like bandages, so we're going to do those in a bandage color. Now, this is not a damp dry brush. This is just a normal paint job with our wet palette. If you make a mistake, that's okay. We can touch up later. While the first coat dries, we're going to take this Wraithbone and paint the cloth on the Great Knife. While that's drying, we're going to go over the nurse's shoe with a damp dry brush of Wraithbone. Now that that second coat is drying, we're going to take some Leadbelcher here. And keep in mind, unless I say it's a damp dry brush, it's just regular painting, okay? We're going to paint that on the metal parts of the hilt. We're not going to worry about touching parts up until we finish the entire torso. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going back and forth, cleaning up after every coat. Next, we're going to use Pallid Witch Flesh to get our base coat for the wood. Remember to get in between the bandages, like right here, places like that. All those little areas where the wood will be. Once our base color of the wood is dry, we're going to go in with Wildwood, taking a small brush, dry it off as much as possible first. Once you apply this stuff, try to not touch it at all, because it will gunk up and it'll look bad. But we're going to go over all the little wood surfaces with this color. It acts as a bit of a wash. Now while all that's drying, we're going to take Iron Warriors and paint all the metal on the back of the torso. Next, we're going to do just a plain old dry brush over the straps here. Just to bring it out a little bit more. We're using Mournfang Brown for this. So I did a wash of Seraphim Sepia over the bandages, and now I'm painting the nurse's foot with Pallid Witch Flesh. After this color, it's time to touch up everything on the torso, cleaning up wherever we might have happened to get the wrong color. And then the torso will be done. Here's a look at the color differentiation between the Pallid Witch Flesh and the Wraithbone on the shoes. Once the upper body is done, we're going to do a damp dry brush of Cadian Flesh Tone all over the human skin. It's going to take a few coats, so take your time. Now once it's dried, we're going to take one of these wash brushes. Again, this is a large Citadel shade brush. Again, you can use any kind of brush of this type, something that can hold a lot of paint. But we're going to take Reikland Flesh Shade, and we're going to do a very heavy wash over the entire thing. Now, this is, again, just like on the skin, we want to keep an eye on it and make sure it doesn't really pool anywhere we don't want it. It's okay if it pools in the recesses there, but anywhere else, we want a nice even coat. So as you do this, and even right after, keep an eye on it for a few minutes to check for any kind of pooling, and then dab it up with your brush whenever you see it. And while that sits aside to dry, we're going to finally get started on the head, starting with a damp dry brush of Iron Warriors. This will be the under metallic kind of layer there. And we'll do the same thing with the great knife. Make sure we get a nice even coat. You know, we probably should have done this first, but I'm going to do a damp dry brush of Kislev flesh for the fleshy bits under the helmet. We'll have to touch up later, but that's okay. That's going to be our first layer. We're still going to do a wash in it as well. I've already touched up the bottom, and while that's drying, I'm going to start doing a heavy dry brush of Doombull Brown, which is a nice red-brown color, and we're going to do this all over. We want it nice and heavy. This is just a regular dry brush, not a damp dry brush, okay? And you can see that we got a nice coat on there, and we can still see some of the metallic underneath. So it's looking really nice. And next we're going to take corn red and do a dry brush of that. This time it's not going to be as heavy. And again, just regular old dry brush. But we're going to do less of this. We're going to do it sporadically, just kind of here and there, getting as much of the paint off of our brush as we can, okay? And there it is with our corn red on there, okay? You can see it on the edges here. A little bit on there. All right. And then finally a dry brush of Mephiston red, but this time less than any of the others. We want to try to focus on the sharp edges and maybe a little bit here and there. But for the most part, we want very, very little of this. This is just going to be a minor highlight, okay? And there we go. We got the 3 shades of red. We got the metal underneath. Got all those details nice and crisp. And then finally, for the last color, we're going to take Reikland Flesh Shade, and we are going to do a wash of that over the skin underneath the helmet, okay? So we're going to take our wash brush, or in this case, it's called a shade brush, okay? Get a bunch on there, and we're going to go and get all that skin underneath with it, okay? And again, don't let it pool too much. So we're going to, you know, take our time, and we're also going to make sure that it's not pooling and keep an eye on it as we go. Spread it around as needed, okay? Okay. All right. I'm going to clean up this little bit of excess. You can see right here, right? It's pooling, so dab that up a little bit, okay? All right, and I'll keep an eye on it as it's drying and dab up as needed, okay? And once this dries, that is our Pyramid Head's head. Now for the last part of Pyramid Head, we have the great knife. So we're taking our Doombull Brown on a piece of torn off sponge, right? We're going to try to get off as much of this as possible, because we're going to do a stippling effect on it to simulate rust, okay? So it's going to kind of go all over, right? Not too heavy. We don't want all these spots though, so we're gonna try to clean that up a bit. We don't want to have just like a small splotch of it, so anywhere where you've got too heavy of a spot, you can kind of dab around it to kind of blend that in. And this is just our first rust color. We'll be doing a lot more than this. Let's get the bottom here a little bit. Oops. A little more of that back on there. Oops, see, we got another splotch. So if you're getting splotches like that, it's because there's too much paint on your sponge, but we're making it work. Next, we're going to find us a crappy brush, dip it in some Typhus Corrosion, and we're going to try to cover the majority of this in that Typhus Corrosion. You don't want it too thin of a coat, but maybe not super thick either. This is a pretty thin paint, but we just want to try to get it all over the majority of the great knife. We're gonna have to do one side at a time, just because it's gonna ruin it if we flip it over, you know. But yeah, we're gonna try to cover the majority of it, and then we'll set it aside till it's fully dry. And now that that's dry, it doesn't show up the best on camera, but we have this nice gritty grime to it. Much more dirty and rusty looking. So next we're going to do a dry brush, very little Ryza Rust. This is a dry brush paint. I'm going to use just a little bit. I don't want to make this too light, so very little. Let's find us a crappy dry brush. We'll use this guy here, okay? Doesn't really need much of a shake, honestly, but a little bit on there. Up as much of it off on our paper towel as we can, and just here and there, we're going to add a little bit. Get a little bit more on that brush there. Okay. You can see it starting to come up on there with that rustiness to it. Again, I don't want to add too much of this, but a little bit here and there. And you can see the effect it has. This will be our last step to completing Pyramid Head himself, and then we can move on to the nurse. Now we're doing the skin of the nurse, and remember, just like the foot, we're using Pallid Witch flesh for this. We're just going to do a damp dry brush all over with this Pallid Witch flesh. I'm going to take a few coats, so take your time and make sure you brush out any thick brush strokes. And for the nurse's clothes, we're going to do a damp dry brush of gray cere. This is going to give it a, a grayish tint to it, and it has a little bit of a warm tone to it as well to make the clothes look old and dingy. So instead of white, it's like a grayish off-white with a warm hue to it. And we'll do this all over the clothes. And remember though, the shoes are Wraithbone. Off camera, I used some Wraithbone for the gloves, and I'll be using some Ard Coat once it dries to give it a nice gloss finish. Now, while all that's drying, I'm going to take, running out, but my Reikland Flesh Shade, and we're going to shade in the head and face. We don't want to go too heavy with this, but we'll do a nice even layer over all of it, get in all those little crevices there, and keep an eye on it so it doesn't pool too much, okay? So I'm going to start on the face and move towards the back of the head. Again, I'm going to keep an eye on it to make sure nothing pools. Now, while that dries, and yes, I did glue the top and bottom half of the clothing together, I'm going to do just a plain old dry brush over all the raised wrinkles and everything on the clothes with Pallid Witch flesh. Plain old dry brush. And we're going to go heavy with this because we want to bring some of that white color back into the clothing and kind of see where I'm getting at with it. See? Yeah. Okay, next I'm going to do another wash on the face using 2 dollops of Lahmian medium and 1 dollop of Carriburg crimson. And in case anyone needed to know, the underwear was painted in Ushapti bone, just to give it a, she's been wearing this way too long kind of look. Since, obviously, she's dead. So, but yeah, we're gonna wash this all over and give it that nice reddish, dirty, bruised look to it. A little more on the brush there. Yeah. And this will just kind of tint the entire piece. And we're gonna try. I tried to blend in the Pallid Witch flesh for the neck, just so we have a little more of a blended in look, and it's not such a stark contrast. But yeah. Okay, and there we go. See, it's gonna have that pinkish red tint to it now. The top maybe needs a little more. And there we go. It's hard to see, but there is a slight reddish tint now. So we're going to set that aside to dry. And for the pipe, oops, I'm going to prop this up in a way that it doesn't bump into anything really. Okay. In the meantime, I did do the pipe, and I did the same thing as the great knife. So Iron Warriors, Typhus Corrosion, and then a dry brush of Ryza Rust. So next I took about 2 dollops of Galvorback Red and about 3 dollops of the Lahmian Medium to get the darker blood effect. I'm going to let that dry. And yes, as you can see, I did glue the limbs on. Okay, now what we're doing is bouncing back and forth between Pallid Witch flesh, Flayed One flesh, and Rakarth flesh. We're taking little bits of sponge and dabbing those various colors all over the skin. You can see on the arms how they're already coming along. Look really good. It's going to give us that nice marbly effect. So we're going to go over and cover the entirety of the skin with these 3 various paints. Just dabbing it on. Just to spot it, you know. So basically taking a piece of sponge, dipping into the paint, dipping it off for a dry brush, and dabbing it on. And again, we're doing this all over the skin. We want the whole thing to have the various areas of all 3 colors, just to cover the whole thing and give it a nice marbly effect. And there's our marbling effect completed. Now all that's left is to do the ard coat on the gloves, and then the nurse is complete.
Now as we get onto the base, you'll see that I applied the texture before the metallics. Honestly, it should have been the other way around, but you could follow as is or reverse the first 2 steps.
Alright, so the first thing we're doing with this base is we're taking a crappy brush and some Armageddon dust and dabbing it on here and there, some gobs as well. This is going to cover those seams we were talking about, the gaps. And it's also going to add a nice varied texture. We're just going to randomly place this throughout. But avoid where we put Pyramid Head, the peg, and avoid the spot where the nurse goes because we don't want fitment issues. Then once this is fully dry after 24 hours, we'll continue. So like I said, it might make more sense to do your damp dry brush of Leadbelcher before you do the Armageddon dust. But honestly, it's not going to matter all that much since we're doing layers over everything anyway. Afterwards, we're going to paint the flesh around the base, just on here, all those around the sides, with Kislev flesh. Might take a few coats. After touching everything up, I do a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade over all of the skin parts, all of that flesh. Again, being careful not to let it pool too much. So like there, for example, soak that up. See? Next, I'm doing a wash over all of the metal and texture with Agrax Earthshade. Make sure we get some good coverage on everything. And the last step for the base is to build up a heavy dry brush all over the metal with Ryza Rust. Now that everything's been super glued into place, our kit is done and it's time for the final showcase.